All right. Well, I think, we may have some more folks join us as we go along, but it's 10:05. And so welcome to everybody for joining us for this community of learners. This is a monthly event that we do, and now we're on Zoom to get together. The CPLA committee organizes an opportunity for us to get together, whether we're students, staff, faculty, to talk about the liberal arts, to talk about Christian perspective for learning and the integration of faith and learning. So we've had numerous faculty share in this time. We had Roger and Deb Varland. Last month, we looked at the cross-cultural studies program, and grateful for the chance to hear from Diane and others about our cross-cultural studies, and that kind of ties in a little bit to today. And so really excited to welcome Dr. Sarah Lane Ritchie to speak with us today. And this is going to be informal. This is not like a super heavy-duty lecture, although Dr. Lane Ritchie could certainly do that. But Sarah is a graduate of Spring Arbor University, 2008, majored in philosophy and religion, and let's see if I'm remembering right, minored in biology and psychology, and just a wonderful person that I think you'll enjoy learning from, hearing her perspective. Currently, Sarah is lecturer in theology and science at New College School of Divinity at the University of Edinburgh. And so Sarah was just mentioning that the sun goes down at this time of year, about 3:30 out there. So joining us from the old world, Scotland. A few other things about Sarah. She's married to Martin, and Martin is a minister in the Church of Scotland. They have a 4-month-old baby girl, and in terms of academic pursuits and research, Sarah just has a tremendous amount of accomplishments. And I mean, just speaking on my own personal basis, I just couldn't be prouder to see what you have done and the work that you're doing for the Academy, but also for the church. And so a little bit of background on her. After Spring Arbor, Sarah went on to Princeton Theological Seminary and earned a Master of Divinity, then an MSc, a Master's in Science, I'm sure, of some sort, yes, in Science and Religion at the University of Edinburgh, and then a PhD at the University of Edinburgh. Sarah is recipient and coordinator of a number of major grants from the John Templeton Foundation. One of the more recent ones, if I can find it, it has to do with theological anthropology, fundamental need and human flourishing. And there are just a number of accomplishments that Sarah has reached, and just want to congratulate you also on your book. Monograph came out last year with Cambridge University Press, and it is entitled Divine Action and the Human Mind. So if you're picking up some of this, you realize that Sarah is one of those unique individuals that brings together theology and science, and we're really fortunate that you joined us. So thank you, Dr. Lane Ritchie, and hope I can call you Sarah. I will start with just a little anecdote, because I started Spring Arbor in 2006 as a rookie professor, and I was straight from Scotland at the University of Edinburgh, and I was teaching a semester class at Spring Arbor University, small group, maybe 8 of us, 10, and I really didn't know what I was doing, but my students were so gracious. We were looking at patristics and theological interpretation of scripture, And one of the evenings, it was an evening class, one of my students said, "Hey, let's go to Denny's." And I'm thinking, well, I'm the professor. We can do that, right? We can have a time to talk theology and science at Denny's. So we went, and I remember that evening, Sarah, your questions, your curiosity. You're talking about Genesis and Adam and Eve and science and evolution. And by the way, here's a side note: that particular Denny's in Jackson had a COVID outbreak. So there's a little sidebar for you. But I think in terms of integrating faith and learning, it's so, I think, helpful and really necessary that we explore topics like how do scientific advances in research impact our understanding of faith. And so I'm going to pause just for a moment and maybe ask you, since we looked at cross-cultural studies last month in this group, Sarah, could you talk to us a little bit about what it's like to live in Scotland, especially as an American moving there, and some of the quirks that you've encountered, some of the things you love, anything at all to help us understand that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having me. And in particular, thank you so much to Dr. Holsinger Friesen for his very kind invitation to me. I am loving seeing all of your familiar faces again, and I'm only sorry that we can't do this in person. I have such a warm spot in my heart for Spring Arbor and had some really great years there. And I'm actually quite thankful for the investment that so many of my professors and other members of staff for all the investment that they poured into me, and it has really shaped me as a human and not only as a scholar. And so I'm really grateful to you all for the community that you've built and continue to invest in. Yeah, so I've been in Scotland now for 7 years. So I've been there through I'd say a series of pretty significant like world events. Brexit happened not too long ago. And of course, my own life events. I married a Scottish guy, had a baby, all of these things, and then did multiple degrees there here and postdoc, and now I'm a lecturer here. And yeah, so I mean, in some ways, being here has actually shaped me significantly as a person, as an academic. Yeah, no, Scotland is a very cool place to be. It is cool. It's very cool. It's wild. It's rugged. It's a fabulous place, I think, to study.
And cool is the operative word, right? It's a little on the cool side.
It is, yeah. And actually, so we're talking about things I don't like. One of the things that I really kind of do hate here is the weather. And people here are always teasing me, saying, "You're from Michigan, you can handle cold winters." I'm like, yes. But we have 4 seasons in Michigan. The winters are very, very cold, but it's kind of like a dry cold, and it's bright, and there's snow, there's stuff to do outside. And here it's sort of like a constant wet, gray cold, windy, and it's like a sort of cold that like seeps into your bones and just like never goes away. Also, they don't really insulate houses here properly. I don't know why this is still a problem, but it is. And so you just never really get warm or dry here. But other than that, it's great.
And we have 62 degrees and sunny. So come back to Michigan.
I know. Yeah. It's ugh. Yeah, no. So I mean, I could talk a long time about the differences between Scotland and America. But I'd say one thing I love about working here is how accessible everything is in terms of other academic opportunities. Like I love being able to get on a plane, well, before COVID, get on a plane in an hour. I'm in some other European country, and you don't need visas for that. You just go. And being able to do conferences and connect with scholars across Europe, and just like get on a train and go to London or Oxford or Cambridge and connect with people there. It's a very fertile environment. And Scottish people have a real down to earthness about them.
Yeah.
They are like the least pretentious people you'll ever meet.
Right.
In fact, this can actually work against them sometimes. They have a thing here they call tall poppy syndrome. A poppy is a flower. And so the tall poppy syndrome. And it's like this idea that if a tall poppy starts to really grow high, it's going to get cut down. And so it's actually kind of like there's a dark side to that as well, where it can be hard to really seize for, go forward and be ambitious here. Because of like how down to earth everybody is. But it is a really warm and lovely place to be.
Awesome. Thank you. Uh, I wonder, and it's good to see you, Dr. Brewer. Welcome.
Hey,
I
Ken.
I wonder, Sarah, if you might talk with us a little bit about like your life's journey, your path. Okay, starting at Spring Arbor, why you chose the majors you did, and if you want to talk about liberal arts and its influence on you, or like any of the kind of questions that have somewhat propelled you along the way to look at science and theology together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. It's a timely question. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine here about student loans, right? And I, like many other people, have a lot of student loans. But I was lamenting. I was like, yeah, I had a full ride to the University of Michigan to do pre-med, and like I came to Spring Arbor, and I was like, do I regret that decision? I'm like, actually, I don't think I regret that decision.
Wow.
And that's saying something. I think that's a real testament to
Yeah.
Spring Arbor as a place and the sort of like opportunities that it provides for people who want to grow in multiple ways, multiple dimensions. I came to Spring Arbor in a state that many people will recognize, basically not knowing really what I wanted to do with my life, and not having a real sense of who I was either. I had been living overseas in Bangladesh and Pakistan for most of my teen years, and basically moved back to the U.S. to go to college, and so I was really unsure of like my place in the world, what I believed, what I didn't believe, what I wanted to do. I always had been attracted to the sciences. And so when I was young, I thought maybe I wanted to be like a medical missionary or something. And but I think probably the core a core feature of who I've always been has been I've always asked really big questions and had um, questions of ultimate concern, we would say, like in philosophy. So like questions about ultimate reality, like what is it, like what is reality, what is this world, who is God, like how do we know what is true, how do we discern who to listen to and what to believe, and what even makes us believe something, how does belief work. These are questions that I was always having. Even as a young child, I think I was preoccupied with larger metaphysical questions than most people would have. And I didn't realize that there were other people out there like that. So when I came to Spring Arbor, I started out on a pre-med route. Actually, I was doing biology, and I was also like obsessed with psychology from the beginning as well. And so that got added into the mix quite quickly, biology and psychology. And then quickly started taking a lot of the philosophy and religion courses, theology courses, language courses as well, and biblical languages, that is, and became like a hobby, right? So I started loving all the philosophy and religion courses, and realized that like I still love the sciences. I wasn't as obsessed with being a practicing scientist as I was with integrating science into the larger questions about the world and about life and meaning and purpose, right? And so it wasn't just that I wanted to spend all my life in a lab or doing a particular study on one aspect of the human mind or something, or brain. It was more that I wanted to connect the existing research to other disciplines and other questions, and to do something truly interdisciplinary. And so I believe it was in my junior year. I had been taking a lot of philosophy and religion courses, and one day Dr. Brewer pulled me aside and basically said, you might want to consider pursuing this. You seem to really like this. You seem to have a knack for it in some way. Like you might want to actually think about doing this. Like you could do the next step. And I'll never forget that conversation. Actually, that conversation it sort of like lit something on fire in me, and it just resonated. It was one of those moments. It was one of those moments that I would definitely say was like a spirit-led moment, right? Where someone says something to you and you recognize it as true, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely a true thing. Like I do need to pursue this. And so I basically in the middle of my junior year switched my major. Luckily, I've been taking so many philosophy and religion courses that I had basically been doing 2 degrees anyway. And so it wasn't too difficult to switch over. Bumped the biology and the psychology down to minors because I didn't want to let them go. And so I did philosophy, religion, science, psychology, and biology. And it kind of, and that, it's funny because even then in Spring Arbor, that science and theology integration was happening for me in an organic way. So then I went on from there to Princeton Seminary, where this just kind of kept going. So there I really pursued science and religion with one of the great science and religion thinkers of the last couple generations, Wenzel van Heijsteen, a South African scholar. And he really influenced me deeply. And then I was also doing quite a bit of work in what is called pastoral theology, which is basically psychology informed theology. So it's basically integrating theology with the psychological sciences. And I did a lot of work there and was almost did my PhD there in pastoral theology. But I heard about a program in Scotland, in Edinburgh. It was kind of a newer program at the University of Edinburgh and the School of Divinity that was specifically devoted to science and religion. It was an academic study of the integration and the relationship between science and religion, 1-year master's, and it was an opportunity to live in Scotland. The program was very high quality and rigorous. I was very drawn to it. And so I decided to do a master's year to decide whether I wanted to do science and religion or pastoral theology. And so I came over here, instantly fell in love with everything about Scotland and the program and the university, and was blown away by the fact that other people had asked the same questions that I had been asking my whole life. I just hadn't realized that there were other people like me out there who were obsessed with the same sorts of things that I was, who were challenging the same things that I was, who were not, who were experiencing certain dichotomies between science and religion as being problematic in a way that I was, and there was like, I was just blown away that there was a way to systematically approach these big questions in a way that did not require me to give up on my mind or my intellect or my faith. It was just a revelation. So and ever since then, it's been kind of a progression of that. I did my PhD here in science and religion as well, with a focus on divine action in the human mind. So basically looking at, I asked the question, if we are saying that a supernatural God does stuff in the world, does stuff in human minds, what does that say about how God interacts with human brains? So basically looking at kind of the interface and the intersection of the physical world and the more than physical world. And so examining that from scientific, philosophical, and theological perspectives. Then I went to St. Andrews, to the University of St. Andrews, also here in Scotland, to do a postdoctoral fellowship, and was there for a couple years working on theological anthropology. So basically, what does it mean to be human? Those kind of questions. And then came back to New College, to the School of Divinity here in Edinburgh, when a permanent academic post opened up. It was, I was very, very fortunate to get this position. Anybody in academia knows that academic jobs are really hard to come by in the best of times right now. And then it's only harder right now because of COVID stuff. But I was just extremely fortunate to find a position in a place I love, doing exactly what I wanted to do. So that's the short version of many years. So yeah, feel free to follow up on any of that.
Sure. And you live in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've seen it myself. If I'm understanding you right, and I'm trying to tie this in a little bit to my philosophy class. I've got a lot of philosophy students here. Maybe am I hearing you talk about more non-dual ways of looking at reality, where divine and human spheres of activity intersect, interrelate, and this notion, which I believe Spring Arbor has a strong tradition in seeing that the in a way, the closer we get to God, the deeper our faith, in a sense, the richer our lives are as human beings, that you don't have to choose one or the other, either 100% spiritual, 0% human, but in some way, maybe the incarnation is that pointer towards a both and kind of way, where we can live out our lives as creatures and not have to escape them in order to encounter God, but also experience the supernatural breaking through in moments of grace like that. And I will just pause to say that, yeah, maybe am I reading you right, Sarah?
Yeah. So I'd say that my basic intuition from the time that I was young actually was that it cannot be the case that we have like God over here and world over here. And then like every once in a while, maybe God gets into the world. Like that whole cosmology, that metaphysics always seemed wrong to me. Like it can't be the case that we have like a scientific world over here, a physical world that is described by scientific mechanisms. And then over here, we have like a spiritual world and we can like kind of like we can pray and who knows what happens when we pray and we're not really sure and we're really uncomfortable talking about miracles and everything. So we're just going to keep these two areas of life apart. That always felt like wrong. Like surely that cannot be like, surely whatever reality is, whatever is, has to be an integrated whole, like surely. And surely it cannot be the case that what we can discover about the world is going to be fundamentally at odds with spiritual truth, whatever those spiritual truths are, right? And so there are a variety of ways that people have gone about relating science and religion, but I knew that there must be a way to relate them, and it couldn't be antagonistic. So that was sort of like a gut intuition for me, from the beginning, was that like whatever the relationship between science and religion, it cannot be one of mutual exclusivity.
Right. And I think if I'm understanding it right, I mean, this is a difficult path to walk. It's not maybe as easy as, well, I think Spring Arbor, we could say we are a Bible college. We only study the Bible. And if there's any truth in the world, it is in the pages of the Bible. And that's a possible route we could take. There's another route to say the Bible is just a cultural artifact. We could take purely secular approaches to life. But for Spring Arbor and this kind of vigorous interaction of faith and learning, it's not a comfortable way. It's puzzling, it's mysterious, and yet I think your gut, your intuition, I think lines up with what we see with Christian thinkers going all the way back to the beginning and even before. And so I'd like to briefly just give a shout out to my students. If you've got questions for Dr. Lane Ritchie, could you please email them to me, tholsing, THOLSING @arbor.edu. We'll see what we can get to there. I want to invite Dr. Tom Kunzelman, who is professor of chemistry here at Spring Arbor, as well as dean of the School of Natural Sciences. Dr. Kunzelman, any questions? What would you like to bring up?
How long you got, Dr. Ritchie?
As long as you'll have me.
When I'm hearing you talk, you talk about having an interest in science, kind of dabbling in science, but your main passion is, the big, deep questions. I'm sort of the mirror image of that. My big passion is science, but I kind of dabble in the big questions. And we've had some conversations, folks. When I was preparing a lecture a few years ago on chaos theory, I talked with Dr. Sarah quite a bit. And
let's call me Sarah, please, everyone. Okay. Everyone just call me Sarah.
She was very helpful and fixed my thinking in a number of areas. Just want to let you know that. But for me, a sticking point that is a struggle for me and this is my understanding, as I understand the philosophy of science. Part of its birth was in the explanation due to reference to the physical only. And I think that idea, it could be fairly said that that idea in the philosophy of science was sort of cemented in the Enlightenment. During the Enlightenment period, folks were just like, all right, this is a whole mechanistic universe. And of course, since then, things have fluctuated away a little bit. And so in the power, I mean, the explanative power of reference to the physical only, I think most folks would agree is, a pretty good way of doing things. If I get up in a scientific conference and I say, well, this happened in the lab because I prayed over it, I'm not going to get very far. Mm-hmm. And so trying as a scientist at Spring Arbor to help folks integrate faith and science, I'm not speaking of all my faculty, but for me is tough. Mm-hmm. And so I'd just like to hear you comment on my struggle.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And it's one of the kind of core tensions, I think, in this world in the science religion world, the science faith world. So there are multiple levels of discussion that we could have here. And so the kind of like the high level tension that you're talking about, you're getting at, is what we in the field would call the difference between metaphysical naturalism and methodological naturalism. So what are these two terms? What do they mean? Metaphysical naturalism is the assumption or the commitment, the philosophical commitment or assumption that all that there is the physical world. And this is also linked with what is called the causal closure principle, which is getting into technical jargon, but basically it means that anything that happens in the world that is happening in a physical way, that it has a physical cause. So physical events have physical causes. No physical event can have a non-physical cause. Now, that is a metaphysical commitment. It's not a scientific commitment. So you have scientific mechanisms that we can study, but the sort of the way that we think about those mechanisms is not scientific in itself. It's what we call, it would be a philosophical one. So yes, philosophy of science. Now, the problem is that in our our contemporary discourse, we have people like Richard Dawkins who clearly assume a metaphysical naturalism, but they don't discuss that it actually is a metaphysical assumption. Like, this is a philosophical commitment that is not in itself scientific. And actually, every philosopher I know, including atheist philosophers, think that Richard Dawkins is like a really terrible philosopher and he should stay in his lane. Like, he's good at biology, just do biology. That he's really out of his depth when he's starting to talk about philosophy and theology, and that he makes all the rookie mistakes. So I think that's sort of like the first thing I always want to encourage people to do is recognize that there's a distinction between metaphysical naturalism and methodological naturalism. So methodological naturalism is basically the assumption that we can, it's not an assumption. It is a sort of way of doing science. It's a way of engaging with the world. So we ask scientists to operate within a framework of methodological naturalism when they are doing their science. So we just say, okay, here's what science does. It looks for repeatable physical phenomena in the world, and we look at the mechanisms that go into making that happen. We look at causal kind of mechanisms, and that's just what science does. Like, we test things, we discover things, and we discover the regularities in nature that lead things to happen in nature, right? That's just what we do. You don't need to then step outside of that and say that is the only way of knowing about the world. We don't have to then say that nothing can happen if it's not repeatable or testable, right? So what this looks like in practice is that we have tons of scientists all over the world, some of whom are atheists, some of whom are agnostic, some of whom are Christians or other religions. None of them are having any problem actually going about the business of doing their science, right? And what's fascinating is that practicing scientists, actual working scientists, are often quite able to integrate their faith and their scientific work within their same holistic person. And it's only when we get into this sort of like popular antagonistic debate, like of science versus religion, that the tension kind of comes to the surface or becomes overblown. So basically, I think what I would say is that, yes, we have a natural world and we are pretty good. We're really good. Our human minds are pretty amazing at identifying the mechanisms by which things happen in the world. But that doesn't mean that's the only thing that can happen, right? It doesn't mean that a supernatural being that we call God is not able to also interact with the world. We might think that can't happen, but that's not science. That's philosophy and personal kind of intuition as well. I'll leave it there. I could say more, but I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Sarah. And Tom, chime in anytime you want here. Sarah, if you don't mind, I'll raise a question from a student. And so this student says, Sarah, during your journey of reconciling the scientific and religious, did you ever have doubts about the reality of your religious beliefs? If so, how did you handle that? How did you maintain faith in what you knew was real while looking for the answers to your big questions?
Oh gosh, yes. I'm laughing
it's an easy
because
question, right?
I know I'm laughing because well, partly because Dr. Brewer is here on the call and he knows just probably more than anybody else in my life, like just how much these just how much doubts in the legitimacy of my beliefs have been an obsession of mine for my whole life.
Anything.
What's that?
I don't remember you questioning anything.
Like everything. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, it's no. Yeah, so I absolutely have not only have doubted, but continue to doubt. And I'm not at a place though where I think that there are some that would disagree with me here, but I think that doubt is a perfectly normal and expected part of anyone's spiritual life. And if you're not doubting, I don't want to say it's a problem, but it could become a problem, right? So it's like I'm definitely one who thinks that we need to honestly recognize and bring our doubts into the light and discuss them and explore them with other people. I don't think it's healthy not to do that. That's sort of like a commitment for me, is like always be honest and always just seek truth wherever it's found, and engage with people who have had the questions and the doubts that you have also had. I think for me, one of the difficulties was that, and I would say even when I was at Spring Arbor, I was really ashamed of my doubt. And well, speaking personally, I had always struggled to experience God in the way that other people were saying they experienced God. So I remember even as a child, like asking God to do like specific miracles so that I could know that God was real, right? I was like testing God's existence even as a child, right? And that didn't ever work out well for me, like trying to get God to do something so that I could know that God was real. But even at a more like existential level, like I just never experienced like the presence of God in the way that other people were saying that I should, or the way that they seemed to be experiencing God. And I would say actually that it was my psychological like lack of experience of a personal God, like a relational God, that really got me going down the research track that I'm on now, which is looking at these questions of human minds and brains, and like how the whole human person forms religious beliefs and experiences God, like what is involved in that process. And so absolutely, I questioned and I doubted all through my time at Spring Arbor, and it's probably my doubts are certainly what have provoked me to do the things that I have done in my academic career. I basically like did a PhD and wrote a book on my own spiritual journey. That's, yeah. So people ask me a lot, well, why don't you just ditch it all? Why don't you ditch God? Why don't you ditch your faith? What are you doing? And I think honestly, I'm one of these people who has been lucky enough to always have had Christians around me who seem to have something compelling and that I wanted, right? So even when I myself have doubted in the past, and still do, I have always had people around me who seem to be operating in some sort of way that was real and compelling. And they had much more, seemed like fruitful and honest lives than others. And I've always just been compelled by that. A lot of people don't have that experience of Christians, and I'm really lucky that I've always had I've always had like people in my life who were Christians and who kind of kept me in the game, and some of whom are on this call. Right. So it's that kind of personal connection for me with other Christians has gotten me through a lot of times. But gosh, to be honest, I think that spiritual struggle, the dark night of the soul, doubt, like these are some of the most excruciating experiences a human can have. And I think people who doubt and who are seeking religious truth and don't know where to find it, these are the people that I'm probably the most passionate about. I tend not to be so concerned about people who are like rock solid in their faith all the time. I'm really concerned with the marginalized and the people who don't experience themselves as being in the Christian club. I think that's it's a space I really identify with. And I think that there are things, actually a lot of my current research project is looking at kind of bottom up ways that we can incorporate the sciences into our understanding of spiritual practices and disciplines, to looking at the way that the human organism experiences God through different modalities, be it different sorts of worship styles or different experiences in nature, different meditation styles, this sort of thing. Yeah, I think when people come to me and say I'm a doubter, I'm like, me too. It's okay. You're in good company. And honestly, the best Christian thinkers throughout history have also struggled.
Thank you, Sarah. Sometimes I think in the evangelical world, we don't always see just the extent to which Christ, through his life, his actions, his death, and resurrection, made solidarity with humanity at the top of what he did. And you read in scripture, as we do, about his calling out to the Father, and why is this happening? So solidarity, I think, in some weird, mysterious way, nobody really wants to doubt. It would be nicer if we didn't, but it brings us closer, maybe to our frailty, our vulnerability. It has the possibility of drawing us closer to God too, in a very ironic way. But thank you for sharing that. Tom, do you want to follow up with anything, or?
I don't have anything specifically related to what's just been mentioned. I'm interested in these questions from the students, if you're getting any.
Yeah, I am getting some. I'd like to, a couple that I want to kind of maybe end with, but maybe I might throw this out, Sarah. Science is big time in the news because COVID affects virtually everybody on the planet right now. And I'm kind of stealing Dr. Kunzelman's part of your question here, but I think it relates. So any thoughts, Sarah, on your interpretation of the COVID pandemic? Of course, that gets into problem of evil and on that, but also maybe something that I find concerning, and that is one approach to all of this that we've seen in some circles, and not all are Christian, but some are, is to take a very skeptical view towards science, and folks that are prone to conspiracy theories. And what do you think? How has your preparation, your studies, your life experience, and that, what light does it shed on how we can interpret what's going on, with COVID, but also why the conspiracy theories? Why are they so popular, even among some Christians?
Yeah.
Big
yeah.
topic.
No, this is a big question. This is a big question, and it's one I've been debating with my colleagues and sort of my other people who are interested in this in the psychological aspects of the theology and science conversation. Yeah, no, there does seem to be, so there definitely seems to be some sort of like correlation between certain types of religious thinking and experiencing the world and conspiracy thinking. Of course, people who are in in these groups wouldn't think that they're conspiracies, they would think that they're truth, right? So that's an important thing to note here, is that like there's every chance that somebody on this call could be saying, yeah, I'm an evangelical Christian and I think that COVID is a conspiracy from China and all these other things, right? And it's just true, it's not a conspiracy, you know. So I'm aware that anytime I'm talking to a group of Christians, especially in America, I'm aware that I might have a mixed audience, right? But from where I stand, and actually me being out of the US impacts the way I think about this a lot. I was amazed when I came over to the UK, and having been here for the last 7 years, the kind of conversations that I have around science and faith here are completely different than the ones in the US. There are cultural obsessions, I would say, in the US that are not the same here. And so it's like amazing for me to like, when I speak to crowds in the US, like where we always have to talk about evolution, right? So evolution is like a huge one. In different culture war things as well come up anytime I'm speaking to an American crowd. And Christians in the UK and Europe, like other Christians in other parts of the world, are not obsessed with the same sorts of things that we are in America. And I think that's interesting. And it's important to recognize that there's a very particular history over the last like 150 years around American Christianity, evangelicalism in particular, that you really have to look at. And I think a lot of times, and I'm saying this as somebody who grew up within evangelicalism, I feel like I can speak fairly openly about this because I grew up in that world. There's a very particular history behind the particular issues that American evangelicals get obsessed with, but almost nobody is aware of that history. So they think that they are just experiencing God's truth as God's truth and not aware that it's not the only way to think about an issue. So that's the first thing, is I think a lot of times American Christians think that they are just like experiencing the self-evident gospel truth, but are not aware of how it's been filtered through like political and historical like lenses that they're not aware of. So that's the first thing. All right. COVID and conspiracy theories in particular. Gosh, yes. So there's two parts to this. First, is there a correlation between conspiracy thinking and religious belief, or say evangelical beliefs? That's the first question. And then there's a second question of, okay, well, if there is a correlation there, then what is causing that? Let's assume for the moment that there is a correlation, and there is evidence that is true. I was just reading a paper recently, actually, on this, and it's not so much that just believing in a God leads one to have to be more open to conspiracy theories, but it is the case that the more that one's very particular religious framework shapes your worldview and how you engage with institutions and authority and other groups, that is absolutely linked to an increase in openness to conspiracy theories. So what that looks like is that if you are in a religious population where you distrust another group, or you only engage science to the extent that it conforms to your pre-existing religious beliefs, that sort of thing, then you are more likely to be open to conspiracy theory. So that is fascinating that there is this correlation. There does seem to be this correlation. So why might that be the case, right? And then that brings us into actual really interesting research topics, right? So one of the fields that I work in quite a bit is called cognitive science of religion, CSR. So it sort of looks at the way that human minds have evolved, and it examines how religious beliefs might have evolved. And one thing I need to say here is that some of the leading researchers, the leading experimental psychologists in cognitive science of religion are themselves Christians and even evangelical Christians. So just studying the evolution of human minds does not mean that you are trying to disprove the existence of God or the legitimacy of religious beliefs. And so Justin Barrett is one of the leading scholars in this field, and he is the one that you want to look at if you're interested in this stuff. And what we find when we look at kind of the strongest theories in cognitive science of religion is that the human mind experiences religious belief really naturally. The kind of minds that we have are just prone to religious beliefs. And what does that mean? So that means that most people within the field would say that the humans form religious beliefs using the same architecture of our minds that we do to form other sorts of beliefs. So, for example, let's say that I'm walking in the forest at night and I hear a rustling of leaves behind me and a branch breaking. What does my mind do? My mind, if I'm alone in the middle of the night, my mind will almost certainly attribute agency to the source of that sound, right? My first thought is not going to be, oh, a tree just fell. It will probably be, oh my gosh, is there a bear in the forest that's going to eat me or something like that, right? So the idea here is that our minds, in order to navigate our environments, are going to be better suited and enhance our survival success rates if we over attribute agency and purpose to the natural world. Okay, so that's just like one example of how we can see how the human mind attributes agency and looks for purpose in stories out there in our environments, right? And then even if we're wrong about that narrative, even if there is no lion there like waiting to eat me, I'm going to be more likely to survive if I think that there's a threat there and I run than if I don't think that there's a threat and then I get eaten. Yeah. So that's kind of like a very primitive and basic way of looking at how we might have developed minds that are looking for agency and purpose in the world and a cohesive narrative. When there might not actually be purpose and narrative associated with an event, right? So when we get to particularly religious beliefs, we can see that our minds just naturally look for agency and purpose in the world. And the sort of minds that we have are the sorts of minds that very naturally form beliefs about gods. And so if all of that is true, then what we can see is that the same sort of thing that might make us open to religious beliefs might also make us open to seeing purpose in narratives that are not true in other areas of the world, right? So if we are already living our lives in a way where we experience a vibrant relationship with God, who's always interacting with the world, we're already buying into this idea that a non-experimentally verifiable spiritual world is out there and engaging with the world. And there's a God out there that nobody can see, but exists, right? So these are kind of basic faith commitments. And when we are open to that already at one level, the suggestion, the hypothesis is that it might also make us open to unseen forces operative in other areas of the world, right? So if you're already priming yourself to experience something supernatural or to experience a teleology with a purpose behind events in the world, if you're already seeing God or Satan at work in one area of the world, then you're kind of more likely to be open to those sorts of mysterious narratives around other things, right? So I could say more about this, but there are people that are looking into this, and I think, and there are Christian writers actually who are looking into this and saying, okay, Christians, we need to be better than this. We should be, of all people, the most discerning and the most kind of open to truth wherever it's found, and that's when we get into a kind of a conversation about social forces and peer pressure and political allegiances and things. But the science aspect is actually really interesting too.
Yeah, thank you. I might pull back to like a 30,000 foot view, and what I'm hearing is what I'd suggest for especially students here. The Wesleyan quadrilateral, the clock tower, one of those is experience. And one of the questions that we all wrestle with, and we may come to different conclusions, is to what extent is my experience authoritative when it comes to reading, interpreting tradition, or even scripture? And so, should it have a voice? And if so, how much? So to take the example that you raised about evolution, and I experienced this when we lived in Scotland for 4 years. There are evangelicals in Britain. There aren't a lot, but there are very vibrant faith, love God with all their heart. But evolution is really not that controversial for evangelical Christians in Britain. And if if that's the case in Britain, whereas in America, evangelicals are much more split on can evolution and a high view of the Bible's authority coexist, then at least my experience of other Christians might cause me to ask questions. And of course, we can come to different conclusions, but the role of experience as it engages some of these other aspects of the so-called Wesleyan quadrilateral. And I know our time is coming up short here, but Sarah, if I might ask one more student question, this is an open opportunity for you to maybe give a little advice to undergraduates at Spring Arbor. So he asks, were there any important books or thinkers that influenced your thinking that you might recommend to a college student? And I'll broaden it to say, you know, any books, thinkers, or just any kind of words of wisdom that when you think about undergrads at Spring Arbor, what you would want to say to them.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I would encourage Spring Arbor students in particular to do is to not be afraid of, I mean, this is almost cliche, but not to be afraid of inquiry and to not be afraid of engaging with sources that are maybe not in your current bubble of information. I was so afraid of some of my questions. I was really afraid. Actually, I remember even as a child, and then definitely through Spring Arbor, I was afraid that I had experienced things and had doubts and questions that if anybody realized I had would definitely mean that I wasn't a Christian, right? Or that would like kind of ostracize me from my community. I think that the number one thing I would say is to not be afraid of where the truth takes you. And to, and if you are having a hard time figuring out where the truth, like discerning what is true and what is not, then to seek people out who have walked that path before and who have questioned and are happy to like talk about those questions and doubts with you. So that's the first thing is for sure, just don't be afraid of where your mind is taking you. And if your heart, I think if you have a longing to know God and a longing, like I always had a longing and a hunger to know God. I still do, right? I still know, like I would even if I was an atheist, I would never be a happy atheist, right? I would always be a very sad atheist because like I have a hunger and a longing for God, and that has been there from the beginning for me. And like that kind of keeps me honest too. It's like, I know I have that longing. I'm not afraid of where my mind takes me. And I look for people who are operating in both of those things. And so, yeah, there were a lot of pivotal books from me, but they won't be the same ones that are pivotal for you, right? So I think everybody has books and they come at certain points in their life. And because of the timing and the content, they are particularly important. So for me, one book that was really important was A Generous Orthodoxy by Brian McLaren. If you are trying to see if there are different ways of being a Christian, that's a good one for that, right? There is more than one way to be a Christian, and there's more than one approach. So Brian McLaren is great. And actually anything by Brian McLaren is good. And then, so a lot of the books I would recommend are specific to different personality types. One book actually that Dr. Brewer turned me on to is a book called Christianity for Modern Pagans, I believe. It's an analysis kind of engagement with Blaise Pascal. I think he's a 16th century philosopher, theologian, mathematician who really struggled with belief. And he ended up having this dramatic encounter with God that changed his whole life. And he actually just look him up actually sometime. He's a fascinating individual, Blaise Pascal. But really struggled with doubt and had a dramatic experience with God, but actually subsequent to this really dramatic experience with God, went on to develop kind of like a cost benefit analysis of whether or not you should believe or not believe. It's called Pascal's Wager. You may have heard about this before. So that book is an engagement with Pascal from a guy named Peter Kreeft, who's a Catholic philosopher, I believe. So that book is a good one. It was a good one for me at that time. It showed me that there were people out there who had struggled with belief, but still managed to pursue a Christian path, even if their belief wasn't always on board. Another book that I'm looking at my bookshelf over here. Another book that was really important for me is a book called The Predicament of Belief by Philip Clayton and his co-author, who I'm forgetting now. That's terrible. Bad academic practice. But The Predicament of Belief is really good for me as well. And I could go on, but if people have specific questions about what they should read, I'm always happy to have emails or Zoom calls or whatever, so people can email me, and I'm happy to give more detailed suggestions.
Thank you so much. It is 11 o'clock, so I am going to invite us to give you some virtual applause. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing with us the integrity of your story, your journey, and wonderful. You've been part of our community. I hope you know that you will always be a part of our community in our hearts, and we're so happy to see the ways that life is taking you, and the work that you're doing is really important for the church and for the academy. So students, feel free to log off. Thank you. I'm gonna just keep the call open in case any faculty or staff want to say hello, and Sarah, you can leave whenever you need to. But thanks again so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you all for joining in. And again, I'm very happy to discuss anything further if any of you have questions about futures or faith or whatever.
Yes, go to Scotland to study. It's really, really fun.
It is.
Thank you.
Yep.